Hey, welcome back to the Black Ibis Social Club. Another beautiful day, spring day in South Carolina over here, and I'm guessing it's about the same down in the Floridian swamps where Mr. Fisto is. What's up, Fisto?
Hey, man.
Hey,
Good evening.
good evening. And then today, Mr. Josh Tatter from Substack wandered in. He decided to come join us and talk to us. I've been meaning to invite him for like a year now, and he finally got around to coming down. So here you are, man. Welcome, Josh.
Hey man, thanks for having me on. It's nice to finally talk to you guys. I mean, gosh, you and me live like 45 minutes away from each other,
I
maybe half an
know
hour, and
we
have
never
yet
got a
to meet.
chance to get
Yeah,
together. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. South Carolina supremacy, Palmetto State. Or, I mean, I say that as a transplant from the beautiful state of the Soviet Republic of California. Um, but yeah, so Josh over here, he's a regular writer on Substack. He's been a kind of a buddy in our circle for a while now. Oh my God, we got static. It's fucking Twin Peaks over here. Twin Peaks
Got
over
a
here.
light.
Got a light. Okay, now
Got a light.
Josh over here, he's a Substacker. He's a regular commentator on our stuff, and he does a lot of fiction writer. And what Josh is most known for is he's a fantasy writer, fantasy and sci-fi. He writes fantasy, a lot of cowboy fiction that he likes to write that I read. He's a online buddy of our friend of the podcast, Alexander Helene. He's a fellow traveler in our fellow traveler circles, right? So welcome, man. I'm finally glad to hear. I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions. We're going to talk about, the topic at hand, which is, fantasy fiction is really what we're going to talk about today, and the idea of writing and writing. But before we begin a conversation in earnest, there's little bit of house cleaning I got to do. First of all, if you guys are listening to this episode and you haven't listened to last week's episode with Konstantin von Hofmeister, you have to listen. That was probably one of our best episodes. Um,
Yeah, that one was really a trip. Very, very cool conversation with an incredibly well-read and intelligent gentleman.
right, and important stuff about his book Multipolarity, and then Mr. Fisto Sobani over here graced his podcast with his presence, and that was a very
Yeah.
great conversation. You guys talked about Twin Peaks and stuff, which was cool.
Yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
what'd you think of it? I've been looking forward to getting feedback about it
I
because
haven't actually finished it all yet. I've been
okay,
like
all right.
insanely busy, and most of my I either listen to podcasts when I'm driving to work, and because I have a 45-minute drive to work, or I listen to podcasts at night. For some freaking reason. Well, okay, I'll tell you why. My daughter's on spring break right now, right? And on a regular school night, she goes to bed at 7, but because it's
Yeah.
spring break,
Yeah.
where she's just staying up until 9, 9:30, even 10, and kind of like doing her own thing. And it's just like by the time like she falls asleep and I put her to bed and everything, I want to go to bed myself. So it's like I just haven't like I've been falling asleep like at 9:45, 10 every night. So I haven't really got a chance to catch up on my podcast. That's on my to-do list.
No worries, no rush, no
Um,
rush, no rush.
I'll have plenty of time. Um, Yeah, let me see. Oh, my wife just messaged me. My dog is still sick. She's dehydrated.
Oh
I gotta
no.
do that. But yeah, what I wanted to talk about, besides telling people to listen to that episode, is that one of the things that's very critical to understand about the Black Ibis Social Club, right, is that it ultimately is a social club, right? And while we discriminate, we are a very discriminating group of individuals here at the social club, right? We don't let any just rabble walk off the streets, right? But at the same time, just because you're invited to the social club doesn't mean we agree with everything you have to say, okay? There's been plenty of guests that uh, I listened to and we had conversations with, and I just didn't 100% agree with. Matter of fact, I don't agree with half the stuff Fisto says, right? Like specifically his like love of Panem instead of Judy and blah blah blah, his
Listen.
wellness.
Just because I was the one guy you invited in off the street and you just nailed it in one
And he never
and
went
just
away. He
slammed the
never
door shut
fucking
for it.
moved.
Yeah,
Yeah.
nope. I got
Hey
one
man,
bum. I got one swamp bum, and I'm good.
that's
Done.
Right.
what you that's what you get with Floridians, man. They just show up and they never leave.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, listen, it's better to be it's better to be lucky than good.
we
All
have
right,
you know what?
that's all I'm saying.
We might have to just have like a South Carolina supremacy podcast with Josh and Isaiah on here because we're all from the low country over here, you know?
No, man, you
Um,
do that, I might actually come up there and do it in person.
yeah,
How fun would that be?
maybe we need to do a podcast over in Savannah. I think there's like another one or two
Yeah,
people from the general area. I think we had somebody that I think I think librarian lives in the South somewhere. You know, he's not doxing himself, but I know he lives in the general, like
yeah.
the South.
Nah, he
You
would
could tell
be.
from his voice. He's got that Southern
Yeah, he would
accent.
be close. He would be close. I remember him talking a while back about doing a meetup.
Yeah, yeah.
And something like that in the southern reaches would work. I like the idea. I like the idea of you and the South Carolina guys, like Josh and everybody else, being in conversation, and then just halfway through, I'll stumble in drunk on whiskey and or moonshine or whatever, and just start screaming about
Yeah.
whatever it is I'm going to scream about. I mean,
And
I don't even know what's going to come out of my
we're
mouth
just gonna
until
hang
it
out
does.
at Old Calhoun's Tavern, you know, and just like,
Yeah,
or maybe we
there
can
you
go do it
go.
around the Secession Tree in
Ooh,
Beaufort.
well, that's a great. No, that's actually a great idea.
I don't think it's there anymore. I think it like I don't know. I'd have to ask Josh. Do you know if it's still there? The Secession Tree or whatever.
So the secession house is still there where they started drafting the articles of secession. So we
Yeah.
could do it there, you know. It's like I think it's like a bed and breakfast or something now. But yeah, we could
Nice.
do that.
We could
We got to
we
get
could
a
meet.
Jim Ross sounding board when
Yeah,
Fisto walks in. My God, it's Fisto.
Yeah, and then we have the secession house, and then we can hang out there, and then we can draft the articles of empire, the
we can
articles of the Imperium,
we can
and
drive up to Charleston and go to the what is it, the Fort Sumter or
oh, that's
whatever.
great.
Right?
Oh, this is such a good idea. Yeah, and then we can shoot at ships as they come
Yeah, just
by
spit into the ocean, you know, something like
and
that.
just pop it off.
Yeah,
Or
I mean,
Only
I got a couple of handguns. They might not be a match for
yeah.
whatever the U.S. Navy or the
Right.
Marines have, but
They have a
no,
submarine.
no,
They have a
no.
submarine base up there. It's a submarine base. It's actually a submarine school up in Charleston where they teach submariners.
No, man, all we got to do is get like some Nerf guns and pop
Hmm.
off at some shit libs, and then it'll just go from there. It'll be fine.
Right. Well, the whole point of this tangent was what I was trying to say.
Yeah, what are we talking
What I
about?
was trying to say before we got sidetracked is that, well, we welcome almost everybody on the podcast. Look, I'm not going to invite like morons and retards. Okay, this is not a debate podcast, right? But everybody's
Debate me, bro.
invited.
Debate me, bro.
Right, and it doesn't mean that I agree with everything everybody on here says. You know, for the most part, I do. But you know, we withhold the right to interview or have a conversation with anybody. Right, this is an open-ended kind of forum. As long as you're not a straight up retard, I don't care. And the reason I don't say like I don't want like, for example, we don't need shit libs on here. You know why we don't need shit libs? Because it's boring. Okay, we've heard it all for like 20 years. It's the same old shit, you know. There's nothing interesting. If you are like a fucking badass, interesting Marxist or something like that, dude, come on. We'll talk about that. You know, that's interesting, right? But if it's the same old regurgitated, like, you know, Apple store, like liberalism, I don't care, man. It's just dumb, you know, like nobody cares about that, right? I wouldn't listen to it, so I'm not gonna listen to it in real life. There's just no point. I can hear that from somebody's like auntie at a golf game down the street, you know? But at the same time, if I disagree with you, what I'm not gonna do is I'm not gonna go bitch about it to the New York Times,
Oh no, I knew you were gonna bring this
right?
up.
All right. Like, look, we might not have the reach, the intellectual dark web like credentials that, you know, or, you know, we're not a chick with blonde hair because those seem to be really popular in the rightosphere, and mostly because the majority of rhinosphere guys are like pathetic simps, right?
Yeah.
But you know,
You
if I
guys, you guys, you guys are gonna be blown away when I'm actually a blonde chick with great tits.
yeah,
You guys are
you
just
know,
gonna be like, whoa.
well,
The
the
greatest
That's
con of all time.
right,
yeah.
the truth of it is that like while we might disagree with things, and I might disagree with people on all within a greater sphere, within outside the sphere. God, I hope you disagree with me, man. I say some outlandish stuff, right? Like, if you agree with half the stuff I say, I don't agree with half the stuff I say, right? And it's like
Yeah.
that's the whole
I
point of this place, right? The whole point of the Black Ibis Society, sit around, sip some. I'm actually drinking some Earl Grey tea right now because I'm kind of tired of coffee, and it's just like just shut up, dude. Like, don't whine about it. You can attack me. You can call me a volcano demon worshiper. You can call me a Nazi or all the million other things that we've been called, That's cool. What I'm not going to do is go, oh my God, they were mean to me, New York
yeah.
Times or whatever, because that's just
Are we
slow.
gonna are we gonna reveal the subtext for the blessed souls that have not
Well,
seen what's been going on?
look, it's just I don't want to get too much into it. Josh knows exactly what we're talking about. Anybody
Oh
that
yeah.
follows us on Substack, oh,
All right,
like
that's
has
fair.
seen it. It really is and the only reason I brought it up is because she is a fellow Substacker. You know what I mean, right? And I was actually subscribed to her. I did. I will be honest. I subscribed to her a long time ago, and I listened to their podcast a few times. I just never found her very interesting. I think that one of the episodes I did listen to her on it, right, was that the episode with her boy, with her friend. What's his name? Oh my God, I'm mind blanking right now. He was on a podcast. Prester John,
Yeah.
right? So
Oh
Prester
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Prester was on her podcast, right? And when she knocks blanket accusations that are the whole right is attacking me and they're degenerates and stupid and they're going to cause war and all this stuff, by association, that's us, man. She's talking about us, right? Now we're nobodies in the scope of things. I'm not Curtis Yarvin and blah blah blah, and we're just a humble podcast merchants here talking about cyberpunk and 19th century Russian literature in this sphere, right? We're more of a cultural podcast, not really a politics podcast. But at the same time, man, like, you know, she made her bank on our side, in our sphere, and we all liked and supported her. People that we know went on her podcast and stuff. And then she turns around and goes to the New York Times, right? I mean, that right there is low. And I'm not saying we should like ostracize or throw hate at this person or anything like that, right? But we just need to be better at not engaging with people of dubious nature. Because I remember, guys, I warned you like months ago, right? I don't know if you remember, right? I've been saying snake, snake I'm like suspicious. I've always said that about that individual,
Yeah.
But I really expected her to stop podcasting once that USA money stopped. But anyways, besides the point, right? Um, um, but what I was trying to, saying is that like, you know, those kind of people just don't need to be engaged with, because they make their money off of parroting ideas that come up in our sphere, in our conversations, and then the first chance they get, they jump ship and betray. It's really that, right? And I'm not saying that we need to be ideological like commissars where we, make everybody have the same ideas and stuff. There's a difference between being that and running to the enemy newspaper of note. You know what I mean? Right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, it's
am I being extreme here? Like,
um I think what's interesting about it is seeing how people will adjust. And I'm trying to be kind here, but adjust and move one way or the other and then kind of adopt the tactics of the enemy.
right,
Like the little back and forth I had, it's funny to me because like one of the first things that one guy did was lump you in with the attacks. The group that you are a part of,
Right. I mean,
or
that's both of us. I'm like,
whatever.
we don't even
Yeah,
know those
right,
people, man. I don't even know what the hell she's talking about, you know?
right, right. And I don't know. I guess at the end of the day, in my mind, like I got real nasty with the guy just immediately because it's like, look, if you're gonna call me all kinds of stuff and say all these kinds of things about it, I could just make it goddamn true. All right. Yeah, Fisto's an asshole. Well, yeah, thank you for noticing. I
Yeah, now,
appreciate it.
now fuck off. You're blocked. I don't want to talk
Yeah,
to you.
now,
You know?
yeah, look, I can be an asshole and a horrible person on my own merits. All
Right.
right. I don't need to be associated with Yarvin. Like, I've hardly even read any of that guy's stuff.
Right.
He's
Some of
throwing. I'm
it's
like, look,
interesting.
I don't. Yeah, I'm sure it is, but there's a lot out there to read. All right, like I don't feel obligated to stay, at the foot of this master or whatever the master du jour is of the moment. Like I've got other things that I'm doing and other things that I'm reading. But at the end of the day, like, look, I'll be an asshole on my own merits. Thank
Right.
you very much.
Right. Absolutely.
I don't need to ride anybody else's coattails. And that
Right.
might sound strange, but it is kind of a personal point of pride to me. Like my bullshit is my own bullshit, and I don't need to be associated with anybody else's bullshit.
Right.
Thank
And,
you.
I don't, and I don't want to drag this out for too much longer because I know you got stuff that you specifically want to talk about. But
Oh yeah.
going back to Fisto's point, you know, there are certainly odious, toxic people on our side for sure. But
Yeah.
but they act like this stuff happened in a vacuum. Like there's no precedent for it. Like it just started happening one day, and it was a great big mystery. That they refuse to acknowledge that there was a pattern and there were abuses leading up to this behavior. You know what I'm saying?
Right, right.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my gosh, I don't know where you listen, there are retarded people on our side. Okay. Well, there is no true our side. There's multiple sides to our side, right?
We may actually be the dumb,
We
retarded
might,
people
we
on our
might,
side.
you know what I
Yeah,
we
that
do you
might
know?
actually be. I mean, I did literally coming off the street one day and I started speaking into a microphone, and that's
Yeah.
how I met Alex.
You didn't even
So,
know how to turn the gain up on your microphone for
yeah,
like
man, I
a
found that
month.
out like what, like 15 minutes ago or something? I
Yeah,
don't even
literally like
remember.
100 episodes in, how to turn the
Yeah.
gain on, you know?
Yeah, man.
I don't even know what I'm doing half the time, you know? Like,
Yeah.
but so ultimately, right? What we're not going to do, right? We're going to call people retarded. We're always going to do it. It's just how it is, and we're going to
Of
disagree with
course.
people across
That's
the
like saying
board,
hello.
right? But we're going to disagree with people in an our side thing. I think that, for example, when I had a disagree, well, I disagreed with Dave Green, and I wrote that essay where I disagreed with him. Okay, but I
Yeah.
still respect Dave Green a lot, and while I might disagree on certain things that he says, right? I did, I'm not going to go to the New York Times or, take any opportunity to go to somebody that is coded as my mortal enemy, basically, and lump in everybody that's ever been a fan of Dave Green as a dumbass and like a bigot and blah, 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 because it's not fair, right? And what I'm never going to do is I'm never going to tar and feather the people that have come on this podcast, right? Even if I disagree with them. And some of them, I disagree with them, there's been, we haven't had a hostile, like, back and forth, but there's been a few people where I disagree with them on the fundamental level of how we should approach like raising children, how we should approach, I'm a optimist and I'm not a, what do you call it? I'm not a doomer whatsoever. So I've disagreed on that topic numerous times. I'm a Christian, but I'm not a fundamentalist in any way, shape, or form. I'm not a conservative. I like drinking alcohol and erotic stuff and that type of stuff. Right. I am okay with homosexuality for the most part, right? Being a spiritual homosexual myself, and and it's just like I'm not in any way, shape, or form going to tar and feather or downplay any guest I've had, and really I'm not gonna shit on any of the guests I have in my sphere. Crap, I never even talk shit about what's his name, the guy that sells those ripoff like uh, work two jobs at the same time online things. You know what I mean?
Um,
I forgot his name. See, that's exactly how I am. I'm like, whatever, dude. He does his own thing. He blocked me. Don't care.
yeah.
Uh,
Oh, that was Walt.
yeah,
Good
Walt.
old
Yeah,
Walt.
I
Good
mean,
old
I
Walt.
do. I disagree with like on almost any point almost every point of his outlook on life, right? But ultimately, I had a good conversation with him somewhat, and he blocked me. Whatever, I'm not going to talk shit. Let him do his own thing. So yeah, that's kind of what the point was. I felt like the whole thing was in bad taste, and it not only is it in bad taste, it stinks of we're in Holy Week right now, right? And uh, it's just such a Judas moment in that's
The
just
cheese moment.
almost appropriate. You know what I mean?
Couldn't
Um,
have waited a couple days for Friday.
right,
No, just had to
right,
do it now,
right. And
or whatever it
know,
was.
you know, I hate to say this, right? But I don't trust the political opinions of women. Time and time again, guys on the right are burnt by women in politics. Like, how many times have we done the same exact thing, right? There's that other blonde one, Lauren Southern or whatever, and then there's all the Elon Musk hoes and all this stuff, right? Like, we make these women to be out to be these like based right wingers or whatever, and they're spouting their intellectual dork web politics and stuff. And then the first chance they get, they bounce, and it's
Yeah.
ultimately the I've just become, let's say, skeptical of women in politics,
Well,
right? Not
listen. Let's up the game, and I actually want to get your guys' opinion on this. Let's go ahead up the wager here. So forget Judy and Pan Am for a minute. Who did it better, Cleopatra or Theodora? Go.
well, Theodora. She was a Christian. She was Constantine's dad, mom. End of conversation.
I
Right.
was gonna say the purplishness of the noblest shroud. That whole speech and that whole, the Nika riots and everything.
Right.
That's really goddamn hard to top.
Yeah.
I mean, Cleopatra got with Julius Caesar,
Yeah.
so I mean,
One is an inbred Greek Egyptian, right? The other one is a saint.
is a saint, right?
Oh, just
From
done
from 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 the most humble beginnings.
from the
From the
most
most
humble
humble beginnings.
beginnings. She's
Josh, what
saint.
do you think? What do you think?
I got to go with Theodora also.
Hell yeah,
I mean,
bro. Let's
yeah,
go.
Right.
All right. Well, women in politics.
All
It
right, so
it
we
it
knocked out
it
of the
peaked.
way.
It
We
peaked.
knocked
It
out
peaked
of
at
the way.
Theodora.
We had to do that. We had to talk about that for a minute. Okay, so that's done and said. That's our topical political monologue, entry monologue. So let's talk about what Josh is here to talk about,
Yeah.
which is writing, because Josh is a writer, and he's specifically a writer of fantasy. So, first of all, Josh, tell us about yourself for a minute. Introduce yourself to people that don't know you, and maybe I didn't do the greatest job of introducing you if people are not on Substack, that type of thing.
yeah. No, I think you did a pretty good job. Uh, Obviously, Josh Tatter here. My Substack is Josh Tatter Has Thoughts, and I started it really because I was playing God of War Ragnarok, and I was like, God, this game sucks donkey ass, and I needed somewhere to write about it. So I started Substack specifically so I could write a whole essay bitching about how awful that game was, and then I started seeing other people posting their fiction, and I was like, well, I've wanted to write fiction for as long as I can remember. I said I got this short story. It's fantasy or elf shit, as Alexandru would say. And I said, let me throw it up there and see what happens. And people started responding, and so I just snowballed, and I just kept writing and writing. And I always imagined myself to be a fantasy writer, not much of a sci-fi writer, but um, I've written quite a few sci-fi short stories. My most popular stuff is probably my westerns that I write. Even my father-in-law, he said, you should really stick with writing westerns, which I guess means he doesn't like my other stuff. Uh, so, I'm actually not from South Carolina. I'm from Virginia. I lived there until 2021. We moved down here because it was turned into too much of a shit lib third world country. And we were like, we got to get out of here. And we found Beaufort on a map. Basically, my wife found Beaufort on a map. We came down and visited it, and we're like, yeah, this is the place. And so yeah, that's me. That's kind of my story. What else would you like to know?
I had my microphone off for a second. Sorry. Yeah, I mean that's it, man. You're a Southerner that moved down further south, right? I mean, Virginia's the South, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
Although don't tell them that, but
yeah, or they used to be the South, or
yeah.
and you moved down to the Low Country. That's what we call where we live, by the way, Fisto. It's called the Low Country, right?
The Low Country. Yes, I've heard of this. I've heard
Right.
of this
We,
magical, mystical place.
it's actually called the Slow Country because everybody's slow as shit down here. Right. Like everything takes like way longer than it does, and like, it's very mellow. We are basically invaded by Ohioans, to be honest. There's Ohioans everywhere. Fucking everywhere. My entire neighborhood is Ohio license
Yes.
plates, or I whenever I drive by a car accident, which is on a daily basis, right? I look at the cars and
Everyone's
everybody's an
everyone's
Ohio license plate because I don't know. You guys don't learn how to drive out there.
listen, everybody's afraid of the Central American immigration issue, but none of you will suspect the Ohio invasion, the
Oh,
Ohio supremacy.
I mean,
Well,
Watch. Just
I've found
watch.
I've found the most out of staters I've found are New Yorkers and Virginians, and I don't know that I've met a lot of Ohioans, but my joke is that getting into car accidents is a national pastime of our area
yeah,
because
no,
people try, like they actively try to get into car accidents. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen in my life.
yeah. If
Gotta get that insurance money. Gotta
if the
get that
people
money.
if the people that if you take the people from here, their driving skills, and you put them in Los Angeles, they would be dead within like 10 minutes on the Los Angeles freeway. Okay? Like they would either get flattened by like one of the billion big rigs that drive through Los Angeles, or they would be shot by somebody because like there's this like habit in this part of the country where you're driving down a two-lane highway and somebody's pulling out from, I don't know, the swamp. I don't know where you're just coming out of nowhere, right? And they pull out in front of you. They speed to pull out in front of you. They wait until the very minute you're approaching like at 70, 80 miles an hour towards them, and that's when they pull in front of you. But you know what they do? They don't drive fast. They slow down for some reason, and it's just like I'm like my brakes on my car are constantly like ruined because everybody like I don't know, gets in front of me and drives like 40 on like a 60,
So
70 mile. It just mind-boggling at the retardation that like happens on the highways out here. Not to mention that the highways in South Carolina were used as like a practice like target for like an A10 warthog because there's fucking potholes everywhere,
Dude, when when I first moved down here, all my coworkers they done some work in Virginia. Like, man, up in Virginia, you guys have such nice roads. I've said, I guess if you say so. Well, the longer I've been here and the more I've been back to Virginia, it's like driving on clouds up there compared to down here. I mean, I don't know where all that tax money we pay is going, but it's not going to the roads.
Right, it's the craziest thing. You're driving along, you're just like shaking, your transmission's falling out of your car, and then you cross into North Carolina, and you're like, what the hell just happened? Why is my
Yeah,
car running so smooth? They're like the roads, all of a sudden, your like alignment's fixed and everything. You're like, oh, I mean, it's the same going into Savannah, down
oil's
into Georgia.
changed. It's got new air
Yeah,
filter, and all you
I,
did was cross the state border. It's
I was
amazing.
driving one time. I went up to Charleston, right, which is about 40 minutes from here, right, and I parked and my fucking tire was flat and there was like a screwdriver sticking out of it. And I was like, oh my God, dude. And in one of the things you have when you get insurance in South Carolina, because they know their roads are so freaking shitty, you actually are entitled to like two windshield changes per year because they expect your windshield to be cracked by like, I don't know, just the asphalt coming off the ground and like yeeting your fucking windshield. So that's actually included in your windshield, I mean, your insurance bylaw.
huh, I did not know that. I
Yeah,
might have to
so
start cracking my windshield on purpose just to
you do, it's
get a new
built
one
in, it's
every
built
couple of years.
in, right? It's the craziest thing, right? But back to fantasy, right? So what's okay, so here's you know, you're right. You know, you write fantasy, and you're a Substack writer, and you post a lot of your writing on Substack. Do you ever plan to compile it and publish it in a small press or on maybe on your own, or do you consider yourself strictly a Substack writer?
Yeah, you know, I've been I'd like to at some point take a bunch of my short stories and put them together uh, as a collection. Most of my fantasy stories are take place in a single world. It's kind of an anthology, and so I'd like to just get a bunch of them that are kind of connected with one another and put them in an anthology or a short story collection, kind of like the guy who writes The Witcher. You know, before he ever wrote any of those books, he released a short story collection. So I'd kind of like to go down that road. Now, I don't, to be perfectly honest, I don't know that I ever have it in me to write a full blown novel. I don't know that I have the attention span for it, but definitely a short story collection at some point for sure.
Well, yeah, I mean, you there's a helicopter flying above. I apologize.
Uh
Your
oh. Uh oh. Just
It's a
kidding.
black one.
Oh no.
No,
That's what you get for shit talking the New York
I
Times,
mean,
brother.
there's an air station, okay, over there, right? Okay, there's a
It's
uh,
about 3 miles from my house.
yeah, there's an air station. So there's all kinds of stuff, and we have a Coast Guard helicopters too. Um, and there's an airport like not too far away up on the island. So there, that's the thing, right? You have a pretty like good little community on Substack. Of there's a lot of writers that are sharing a lot of fiction, right? And unfortunately, I don't feel like Substack really does very good job of like I don't know caring about writing on Substack anymore. They're all about other stuff now. Um, but you guys have built a really good community of different writers, and there's a lot of fiction on there, specifically in the fantasy and sci-fi thing. And then your specific like Western, it's your which is my favorite stuff. Your Everett Brooks stuff, right? It's my favorite of your writing because I do like Westerns, and I think that the I think that the idea of I like the idea of putting fiction out, short fiction out on formats like Substack, and then collecting it and putting it out in better, bigger formats. I think that's an interesting model, and I think that's one that might have a future in a world of where short fiction is no longer, relevant, at least in the greater like scene of the literary and the science fiction world and stuff. I don't know if, I mean, do people buy short story collections in the fantasy world anymore? There used to be tons of magazines, but they're all gone. So maybe, this can be resolved through mediums like Substack, and, communication between those two. And I like that. I like that idea. Right? But what kind of fantasy fiction do you like? Are you more the American guy or the European guy? Or what like where's your fantasy like background come from?
So the first proper fantasy I guess I read was when I read the Chronicles of Narnia I was like 8 years old. So that's C.S. Lewis. That's British. My favorite fantasy author is David Gemmell. He's a British fantasy author, kind of in the mold of Robert E. Howard. His stories are kind of in the, like his most famous character, Druss, is definitely a stand-in for Conan. Um, there are some American fantasy authors I like, David Eddings. Um, you know, and I know you're gonna. Speaking of disagreeing earlier, I know you're gonna vehemently disagree with me on this. When I first read The Name of the Wind, I was like, "Oh man, this is pretty good." Uh, the longer it went on, the longer I was like, "Okay." I mean, the guy is not as clever as he thinks he is. Okay, stuff's not really happening. I mean, by the end of the first book, some stuff happens. It wasn't until I read the second book where I was like, okay, this story is crap. I mean, literally nothing happens, And the second book is like 1,000 pages, and he ends up in the exact same place at the end as he started at the beginning, except he just had a lot of sex in between.
Yeah, with
So
with fairy ninjas.
yeah, so it's no wonder the guy hasn't finished the story, because he's got like 1,800 pages of nothing happening, and he's promised all these epic adventures. And he's only got one book left to finish it.
Patrick
Um,
Rothfuss is his name. Patrick
yeah,
Rothfuss, the original literary, well, fantasy literature beard bro.
yeah, that's right. Uh, I got to be honest. I liked the first three books of A Song of Ice and Fire. The fourth book was an absolute slog, so
Okay.
I haven't read the fifth book yet, because the fourth book was so boring, and he's obviously not going to finish it. Um, so I'm trying to think, what other fantasy authors do I like? I like the guy who writes the Witcher books, Andrzej Sapkowski. He's Polish.
Mhm.
Um, so I mean, I guess I have to say my tastes lean British, since we got C.S. Lewis, Tolkien, David Gemmell. I know there's other people that I can't think of off the top of my head.
Right.
Um, I haven't read any Brandon Sanderson. I don't really have the stomach for that, from what I hear about him. I don't. I tried reading The Wheel of Time. I couldn't even make it halfway through the first book. It was so boring. Um, so yeah, I'd have to say I probably identify more with the British fantasy writers.
That's interesting. So I read all the Game of Thrones novels, right? I read all five of them, right? And it's really interesting because you say that you didn't like four, because four was the last one I liked, right? It's the fifth one I didn't like. And the reason I liked four is because four kept to like the mainland area, like Westeros or whatever, right? And five jumped across the ocean to the Mother of Dragons thing or whatever, right? And that whole thing. And I don't like the problem with those like massive multiple character like storylines with so many characters and stuff is that there's some characters I just don't have any interest in, or storylines I don't really particularly care for. And in the case of Game of Thrones, I've never had any interest on anything that happened across the ocean. I don't like I didn't care about Daenerys, and I didn't care about Khal Drogo, and all that stuff just didn't really interest me. And what I liked about four is that it was really the redemption arc for my favorite character in the series, right? Which was what's his name, Jaime Lannister, right? And it's where he became an interesting character, and it's where he like starts like doing cool stuff. And it also had a Brienne of Tarth, which I liked in that, in that like it was like hey, the two of them doing their thing, and I liked that. But ultimately, like, there's nothing there. Are you familiar with Game of Thrones, Fisto?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, through the TV series and through the culture, the guys that wrote The Expanse used to work for George R. R. Martin. That's how they got started.
Right, right,
So, like, I imagine that the way they did those books is pretty indicative of how they were
right. No,
trained by that guy.
it
So,
is. It is. What's
yeah.
interesting, who do you think, I know the show's over and they already revealed who like wins the Game of Thrones at the end, but who do you think should have won, or who do you think should have ended up on the throne at the very end? Josh, go first.
Well, obviously, I mean, it should have been John. That's what everything was building up to. Um, I mean, the whole thing with Daenerys suddenly going crazy, and I mean that could have worked if it had been set up properly, but they just rushed through the ending, and it was a complete cop out. And going back to what you were saying about the fourth book, I can't necessarily disagree with what you were saying. I liked the same stuff that you liked. I liked Jamie's redemption arc. I liked the stuff focusing on Brienne. Uh, I just vividly remember there's like an entire chapter where Jamie's investigating Tyrion's disappearance, and the whole chapter is him going over prison supplies. And I'm thinking, why am I reading this?
Right.
You know, um, but I agree. Daenerys is a terrible character. She's so boring, and she's even worse in the TV show. Bran. There was one book. was it the third book or maybe it was the fourth book? He's left out entirely, and that was a good thing because his storyline was such a drag. And the problem with Game of Thrones is he kills all these characters off for shock value, but he doesn't replace them with new and interesting characters. You know, yeah, it's a gut punch to the audience to kill off Ned at the end of the first book and to have the Red Wedding, but if you don't replace these characters with newer, more interesting characters, your story just goes nowhere.
Right.
It it grinds to a halt and it runs out of gas, and that's the problem that I ran into with the books. Is it was a problem with the show. But to
Right.
go back to your original question, John,
You
the
think
natural,
John?
yeah, that would have been the natural conclusion to the story.
What about you, Fisto? What do you think?
Pan Am Palmer, obviously.
Pan and Palmer. Okay.
Yeah. No, I actually didn't follow Game of Thrones all that much. I wasn't super
Okay.
interested in it.
I
But I
just
mean,
just mute,
I
mute
know
yourself.
enough. Well, put it like this. I know enough about it that when you say John, you mean Jon Snow, right?
Right.
Yeah, like that strikes me as obvious.
Yeah,
Like
I disagree.
I don't know why, but it strikes me as that's the obvious response.
I'm gonna disagree with you guys. Okay.
I mean, go. I have no, like I
Because
said,
I
Pan Am
have to
Palmer.
disagree because it's my job to disagree, right? But I
You
honestly believe
dislike both.
I dislike
Yes, I
both, right? I
understand.
dislike John and Daenerys, right? Okay,
Oh
but
yeah, I don't like John either. He's such a stick in he's such a sourpuss. He's so droll. He's such a stick in the mud.
right. Well, so who I think he should have died. Who I think should have sat on the Iron Throne at the end, right? You guys ready for it? All right, it's Sansa. That's who I thought should have, right? And I felt like he was actually building her up to in the books, right? Because Sansa is in a strange way the neutral party, right? And she technically has the most claim to both the Northlands and the Southlands, right? So
Uh,
she's a Stark, right? So she's the heir to the North, right? She is the oldest legitimate heir to the North, right? That's not like a cripple, like magician, like her younger brother, right? Like what's his name? The cripple kid, right?
Yeah, Bran.
So she is the healthy, non-crippled, non becoming a tree or something like that, heir to the north. And she's also technically her marriage to what's his name?
Ramsey.
Ramsey, not Ramsey, uh well she got
Oh, um,
what's his name? The little bastard that choked on his own shit, right?
Joffrey. Joffrey. Yeah.
Joffrey, that makes her a Lannister also, right? And therefore she's an heir to the South, right? She's a direct, through marriage, she's basically the the daughter-in-law of the last rightful king of the kingdom, right? And there you go, right? But she's also the way they're setting her up to be in the books, at least, was she was hanging out with Littlefinger, and he was teaching her some creep powers, right? And how to like be kind of a spider herself, right? And she yeeted that little kid into the hole, and she basically got Littlefinger's ass too. And ultimately, right, she could have, it made sense for her to maneuver, into that leadership role, and also, it would have kept to that the whole War of the Roses thing, because eventually England ends up under the reign of Queen Elizabeth, right? And that's when it reaches like almost it's some of its peak in that era, right? It's like it enters its golden age with Elizabeth, and which really lasts until the Victorian era and the post-Victorian era, right? So I thought that Sansa could have become a Queen Elizabeth type figure where she manipulates all sides, has claim to all sides of the kingdom through her, short-lived marriages and through her own blood, and it just made sense to me, right? I think I would have liked her as the winner. Plus, I like the actress. I think the actress did a good job of being a bitch that becomes kind of like good towards the end,
Yeah. I have to say you've persuaded me. I mean, John would have been the natural conclusion, but uh, if you wanted to do a twist, then Sansa would have been, because you're right in the show. Uh, and I haven't read the fifth book, so I don't know if that. I think she features heavily in the fifth book, but I, if I remember correctly, in the books though, she doesn't marry Ramsay Bolton. They substitute some other girl saying that it's her or saying that it's Arya. Isn't that right?
Yeah, they never actually really even interact at all
Yeah.
in the books. So like at least it never gets to that level. That might have been a complete creation of the show itself, you know? So I don't remember them even interacting in the book, right? I think the book ends with her being up in, still being in the eagle's nest, you know? All right, but that's enough Game of Thrones, guys. All right. I actually like a lot of. I'm rushing because Josh is on a time crunch. So make sure you let me know when you have to go. Okay. Um, and I wanted to hit some important conversational topics, right? So I like your choices. You know, I don't like Patrick Rothfuss at all. I didn't like that book at all. You know, uh, David Gemmell. For you guys that are not familiar with David Gemmell, you might be familiar with the movie that was based on David Gemmell's work, which is Legend, right? Which was a Tom Cruise movie, right? And it was, I believe, one of Tom Cruise's first movies, and he is like a. It's about like a unicorn, and it's got it's pretty cool. It's like a pretty kino movie. It's got like some good visuals in it. I don't know if have you guys seen Legend?
I have, but I don't think that was based on a David Gemmell
You sure?
story. I if it is, it's the first I've ever heard of it. Because his first book was Legend, was called Legend, but it's about something else entirely than what the movie's about.
Oh, maybe I'm
Unless
completely wrong. So I might be completely wrong, which is rare.
I have seen Legend. It's been a while, but it's a great movie.
All right. No, I guess you're right. The movie's not based on a Gemmell movie, right?
As far as
Um,
I know, they've never adapted his work for TV or movies, which is a crime because he's like I mean he's at least as good. Well, I think he's better than Martin. Um, but yeah, they as far as I know, they've never adapted any of his stuff for the screen.
you know what fantasy writer I really like? Uh, Guy Gavriel Kay. All right, and he's kind of a bit of a acquired taste, a little bit on the periphery of mainstream kind of fantasy. Um, Guy Gavriel Kay is originally best known for helping Tolkien's son, what's his name,
Christopher.
Christopher Tolkien, complete the Silmarillion, right? And that he's a Canadian writer of fantasy, but he writes. You know, he's still writing right now. There's a new book that came out like a year or two ago. He writes. Uh, he used to write more like second world, like fantasy. You know, your traditional fantasy. He has a really good novel called Tigana. He has a series of four novels that are very much like Tolkien-esque portal fiction, or not Tolkien-esque, but very much Narnia-esque portal fiction, but you know, of adults from our or teenagers from our world ending up in like a fantasy world type of kind of storyline. Um, and then he wrote a really good novel called Tigana, which is about really interesting kind of concept. It's about this country, this nation in the middle of this fantasy world that's being fought over. Well, the whole world is basically being fought by two kind of superpowered wizards, and the people of this nation kind of rebelled, and one of the wizards like really fucking hated them, and he used his magic to not only remove that nation from the map, but he made everybody forget about it, right? And actually like
Hmm.
erased the entire like nation, its culture, everything from like the memory. It was like a basically a spiritual magical genocide on this nation. The people of that nation can still remember it, and you know they still like are able to like talk about it, but it's like in a very like magically down powered, it's a very interesting kind of concept. And you know you have these people kind of rebelling against these wizards, you know. And then after that, he pretty much writes very historically inspired fiction. A very good novel is The Lions of Al Rasan, which is basically really it's about the Muslim Spain and the Reconquista, and one of the characters is basically El Cid from history. Uh, it's very good. And you've got he likes Byzantine history a lot, so a lot of his like fantasy world takes place in a Byzantine Empire kind of analog. And also he likes Renaissance era like Venice and Italy. So there's a lot of like uh, kind of a back and forth between like the Byzantine world and the Venetian Republic, and but they're all like the fantasy version of those places, and it's very interesting. A lot of his novels take place in the same world, and they're kind of like they're not connected directly by plot, but they're connected by you'll have a character from one novel that shows up like two novels later, and he's like an old man that's like, "Oh, I'm a traveler from Cerenza or whatever," and you reckon if you read the other book, you recognize him or her and that kind of stuff. So if you haven't read Guy Gavriel Kay, I highly recommend you give it a read. Um,
Yeah, my birthday's coming up in a couple weeks. I might have to tell my wife, "Hey, I want some of these books for my birthday."
Yeah, no, I like they're just they're if there's one criticism of them from people that tend to read a lot of fantasy is that they're a little bit higher level, if that makes sense. They're a little bit more literary written. Have you read any what's his name? The Pringles guy. The Book of the New Sun.
Uh, no, I have not.
Okay, that's another one you need to add to your list. You too, Fisto. Book of the New Sun.
Okay.
Okay,
All right. Book of the New Sun. Got
it
it.
it's a dying Earth kind of genre. It's basically
Oh, I've heard of this.
yeah.
Who's the Pringles guy?
Hold
What's
on.
his
I'm going to
name?
grab my notebook.
Hang
Um,
on, let me see.
so the author invented Pringles,
Oh, okay.
and if you look at his picture, his name is Gene Wolfe, right?
Gene Wolfe. Oh, I see. Okay.
If you look at his picture of Gene Wolfe, he's basically the Pringles guy on the
Yeah, he
like
looks just like it. Yep.
because supposedly he invented Pringles because he worked at the
What's the title
factory.
again, real quick?
Book of the New Sun. It's actually four books, but they're like all combined. Um, it's basically about a torturer that he's
Ew.
basically Jesus Christ.
Ew.
But it's like Earth, but it's like Earth in the like million years in the future, so it's like reverted back to kind of a medieval kind of world. But there's robots and shit, and like there's rockets and all kinds of crazy mutants and aliens and stuff, but like nobody knows that they are that. So like it you have to read the book and like decode what the hell's going on sometimes. Like they'll be like, so I was standing in the city, and all of a sudden one of the really tall pointy spires of the castle decided in a blaze of fire to take off into the sky. And he's describing like a rocket launch, right? But it's obviously he's using like medieval era, like medieval level technological speak to describe like high tech stuff.
Yeah.
It's really wild, man. There's mutants and stuff. There's like it's like the craziest books ever. There's like
Yeah.
robots and like robot mutants and like beast people
Oh, I
and
see here the South America plays a serious role.
yeah, it's
The
like
Commonwealth.
yeah, it's all the kind of crazy stuff, right? Uh,
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's a tough book because you have to like you're like what are they talking about here, and then you're like, oh yeah, they're talking about like rocket ships or like genetic stuff, but they make it seem like magic. It's like
Really arcane.
yeah, it's like
Yeah.
and the dude's literally like a professional torturer, but he like leaves the guild because he refuses to torture this one chick. It's like really crazy, like
Cool.
very gothic. um
Gothic. Outstanding.
Right. That's really cool. So that's some of my fantasy stuff, and of course, I love Lord of the Rings. Right? Who doesn't like Lord of the Rings? But it brings me to the point that I wanted to have, and I wanted to even write an essay about this. Right? But I wanted to talk to somebody that writes fantasy, right? And it was either you, Josh, or Lisa. And Lisa's probably tired of talking to us, man. She's out chasing skunks right now or something. So
I think she might be launching a jihad against
jihad's on the
skunks.
skunks,
Yeah, I
right?
feel like I feel like this is going to get very serious for her.
Yeah, that's some inside politics right there. Her
Yeah, don't
hatred
worry
of
about it, guys.
skunks. All
Don't
right,
worry
don't
about
worry,
it.
Lisa. I'm sorry about your skunk problem.
Yes, the
But
Great Skunk War has begun.
the Great Skunk War of Canada, right? But the reason I actually want to talk to you, Josh, an American fantasy writer, is because my point is going to be a very American point, right? When Tolkien wrote Lord of the Rings, right, one of his intentions, and correct me if I'm wrong, was that he wanted to bring a level of to re-mythologize the English, the British, right? He felt that unlike the that there was a lack of connection between the British and their Anglo-Saxon, Germanic, connection, right? Specifically, he was a big fan of, on, of old medieval and older than medieval literature, stuff like Beowulf and that sort of thing. And he wanted to write a mythology for England, right? And his, you know, and that's what he did, right, with Lord of the Rings, right? He brought in his Christianity, he brought in a very English, very British sensibility to Lord of the Rings. And most of all, the people that he made the heroes of Lord of the Rings are the hobbits, right? And there's nothing more English than the hobbits, okay? When you think of England, you think of, hobbits. I mean, that's what I do, right? I think of the Shire, right? That's our English pastoral small town, small hamlet, village, or whatever the hell the British call it, fantasy, right? I mean, would you guys agree with that?
Yeah,
Yes. Yep. 100%.
Okay, so that's what he did, right? And of course, there was other English fantasy stuff, right? You can't, you can't ignore the Arthurian myths and that type of stuff, right? A lot of them um, really came out of the French, to be honest. They went to France and came back to England and stuff. But that's what Tolkien wanted to do, right? He wanted to remystify and bring some, traditional Christian ideas, traditional what he felt were these Anglo-Saxon ideas, and bring them for a 20th century English population, right? That's what he was trying to do. Now, when we write fantasy, though, right? For some reason, fantasy tends to default to a medieval level thing, right? Why is that? Why is the default for fantasy knights and dragons and shit and that that very pre-industrial era? What in the definition of fantasy, forces us to have a pre-industrial era European mindset? I mean, yes, I know there's like Chinese fantasy and African themed fantasy and all that shit, right? But for the most part, there's a default to pre-industrial Europe for fantasy, right? Why?
That's a good question. I don't know that I'm qualified to answer, but uh, I don't know if that's just what we think that people expect or that's what we identify with fantasy. Uh, I mean, a lot of people, and I know you're not a fan, but a lot of people say Star Wars is sci-fi, but Star Wars is actually space fantasy. It's fantasy in space. There's sword fights and magic and all that kind of stuff. The Force is magic. The Jedi they call them Jedi Knights. And so people kind of accept that, okay, Star Wars is kind of fantasy. Uh, but
I agree with that.
I, I, I just think that's people, I guess we think those are the rules of the genre. I mean, for me, I'm fascinated with that stuff with knights and medieval societies and ancient history. And I guess for me, it's a kind of a way to try and relive or not relive, but maybe live vicariously through some of that stuff. Cause I mean, I'm personally obsessed with like ancient Greece, not as obsessed with ancient Rome, but I still have an affinity for it. And, maybe that's, if we were to extrapolate that, maybe that's just what us fantasy authors are trying to do is we like this stuff. And so maybe this is how we can live vicariously through those worlds. I mean, it has crossed my mind uh, to try to write like a fantasy western. I'm not quite sure how to go about that, but it has crossed my mind to kind of tackle that.
Right.
I
The
mean, but
sorry, go.
Warhammer of sorry, man,
You're good.
Warhammer 40K. That there's a lot of fantasy elements in that too. So I mean, I think there have been attempts to try to break out of that, and those attempts actually are very popular. So I don't know why more people don't try. I guess maybe we're thinking too small. We're stuck in this traditional mindset. Um, but like I said, for me, it's just a way to try to live vicariously through these cultures and characters that, I mean, I've been obsessed with ancient Greece since I watched the 300 Spartans at like 8 or 9 years old. Um, so yeah, man, like I said, I don't know that I'm the guy to answer that question.
Well,
This
thank
is
you for your answer. I think
yeah,
it's a good
that's very
answer.
good.
You know,
I'd like to add a couple thoughts. Are we essentially asking why there hasn't been an American Lord of the Rings yet?
Hey man,
there has. It's called Dune.
his name
Hmm?
is George R. R. Martin.
Okay. Well,
I
I'm gonna
don't
push
agree with that,
back.
by the way.
I
I don't
I'm gonna
disagree
agree
pu-
with
with that.
that. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
when
I'm gonna
people
disagree
when
with
push
that.
people
back.
call,
Well, I want to push back a little against that only because I suspect that if there is going to be that, it's going to have to be perhaps in the quintessential American art form of film. It's not going to be something that's going to be expressed in books, which leads me to my other point is that probably the reason that the default always seems to be the template that Tolkien laid down is just because of the influence of England and Europe on the Anglo-American side of the United States. In my mind, I suspect one of the first attempts was certainly Star Wars.
I agree. I agree. I think
But
Star Wars is the nearest thing we have.
I also keep thinking of Preacher, the comic, because
Right.
comics are kind of an American thing, aren't they?
Yeah, the French have a really good
Okay, right.
graphic
Yeah,
novel
yeah, yeah.
tradition, right?
But like for those unfamiliar with Preacher, it stars a Texas preacher who, hunts down God with a Irish or an Irish vampire from Louisiana and you know, West Texas assassin girlfriend. And it's absolutely ridiculous. But it strikes me that does kind of tie in the myriad threads that currently exist in the United States into, a real American mythic hero in Jesse Custer. I mean, God, the guy's even got the last name. You know what I mean?
Right, right.
So I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think I think I'm certainly not the first person to say this. I think the American version of fantasy is the Western. I mean,
Oh yeah.
our
Yeah.
knights are the cowboys.
Our knights are cowboys. They're
Yeah,
samurai too.
yeah, that's true. That's right. Um, so I mean that. I just think that's the closest that maybe we think we can get. But I've seen, and Alexandra, I've seen you challenge people to just go nuts when writing fantasy. Don't let anything hold them back.
Right.
And one of these days, I'd like to live up to that challenge. I don't know that I'm quite equipped to do that yet, but I mean, like I said, I've been brainstorming. I've been thinking, how could I write a western that's a fantasy with cowboys and all this kind of stuff? I mean, Stephen King says his Dark Tower series is fantasy. I don't really see it that way. I think it's more like alternate universe or science fiction.
Right.
But he's tried to at least tackle it somewhat.
It is very nihilistic on top of that, And in a way, I will note while I agree with you, Preacher, by the way, is very American, the author is Irish, right?
Right, which is partially why I brought it up. It's a lot of this is going to come out of the Anglo side of
Right, the
things,
Anglosphere, yeah.
but I also appreciate how Preacher ties in. I mean, the guy clearly did his homework, and being Irish, I think, gives him a unique perspective on us. That's why Cassidy is such a great character because, he's the Irish guy. What's the most Irish thing in the world? Leave on a boat
Right,
and come to New York City and then
right,
wander the continent.
right,
But he ties in the Latin side. He ties in the Native American side, and by golly, does he tie in the liberal democratic degeneracy?
Right, right. He does a good job of that.
of both coasts, of all coasts, really.
And you know, another interesting American like themed fantasy written by a non-American is actually American Gods by Neil Gaiman. All right.
Ah, yeah.
Which I mean, whether you like Neil Gaiman or not, you know, whatever,
Gonna get canceled. You brought up Neil Gaiman
yeah.
and the New York Times. That
Okay,
helicopter's
Sandman
coming
is still the
back.
best comic graphic novel of all time. Sorry, guys. Right? Um, whether you like him or not, he wrote American Gods, and that is actually a very good novel. It's not a great novel; it's a very good novel, and it does attempt a a look at America through through an interesting kind of perspective, but it ultimately is very British in its perspective, right? It's very European, and he tried to make it American, but he kind of failed in that. But it's a very interesting topic of the gods in America and that type of thing. Um, Now, I agree. First of all, I think that Star Wars is the nearest closest thing we have to an American Lord of the Rings. Uh,
Yeah.
it
Why doesn't it work? Why doesn't it fill the I have a
uh,
thought on that, but
maybe
why doesn't it fill the role?
it doesn't have the depth of Lord of the Rings, I think. It's ultimately there's something
You know,
about
it's World War II. World War II is fake and gay.
right.
And
That's
Star
really what it
Wars
is.
and Star Wars is the liberal democratic,
Fantasy, right? It is
propaganda perfection. I'm
right.
not even saying that as like a bad thing. It's just that's what it comes out of.
It is. It fully, it fully does that, right?
Yeah.
Dune might be the nearest thing to Lord of the Rings in the written form, if you want to go there. Dune is a very fundamentally American bit of fiction, right? It has an idea of basically, I mean, the Atreides, right, are European, right? They're European, you know, their planet is basically, Europe, and they move to like, a colonial holding, often filled with crazy natives, and the land itself is hostile, which is very much America. And there's a, it's written by an American in California when he wrote it. So it is very much and it deals with a lot of issues around the time that, the Arab crisis and the oil crisis is going on in the 70s when it was written, late 60s, 70s. Um, Deals with like a lot of psychedelic type of stuff, right? Now, the question is, and this is where a lot of writers are gonna disagree with me, and I always get pushback for this, right? But this is just my personal opinion. I ultimately think that a work of art, a work of fiction, movies, anything has to say something, right? It has to have a meaning, right? It can't just, I mean, yeah, there's fiction that is just fun, just for fun, for no purpose or whatever, right? But the best fiction, the best work of art says something, right? Lord of the Rings has a lot to say. On its
No,
surface, it is a
yeah.
fantastic adventure story about a hobbit and a ring and elves and shit and magic and battles and demons and all sorts of stuff, right? But it's last the time, and it's going to last for another many hundred years, hopefully, because it says something deep about humanity, about spirituality, about honor, about courage of a small person over the insurmountable evil. There's tons of stuff about redemption. I mean, the key element of the story is, I mean, God, like the most important thing in Lord of the Rings happens in The Hobbit when Bilbo Baggins basically shows mercy towards Gollum. You know,
Hmm.
that's the key moment in the entire four trilogy plus one, right? It all ties in, right? With no Gollum, with Gollum being killed, nothing would have happened, right? The whole thing would have gone to shit, right? And the act of mercy was so key, right? So Lord of the Rings, Tolkien has something to say. Uh, you know, Dune has a lot to say, right? It kind of gets lost in like psychedelic insanity in the later books, but at least in the first few books, there's a lot of stuff discussed, right? The question is, and the reason I tend to criticize the medieval type fantasy ad nauseum, right, is that a lot of times it doesn't say anything, right? It doesn't speak about the people, right? The hobbits in Lord of the Rings were a commentary on the ideal British, right? The ideal Englishman, you know? Um, if we just write about knights and European dudes doing European dude stuff, we're just aping a different continent that's not ours in a
Yeah.
way, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
I mean, that's why I think like Game of Thrones ultimately fails. It doesn't say anything.
It doesn't.
The whole point is that life is shit, and if you're a good person, you're a retard, and you're going to get beheaded. And it's the same with Rothfuss and Name of the Wind. It doesn't say anything. Like now
Right.
that I'm thinking about it, it doesn't say anything. The guy's just like, I'm so awesome. Here's my story about how awesome I am.
Hmm.
Right. Name of the Wind is
You know,
basically Rodfus's like 8,000 page, Dungeons and Dragons character, like
Yeah.
backstory for his bard. And he's the guy that like brings that to the gaming table. And you're like, bro, I ain't gonna read that shit, okay? Roll a 20, and if you get a one, you die. You know what I mean? Because
I
you're like,
said, sorry, finish. Sorry,
no,
I'll let you finish.
but that's exactly what that is, Like he wrote like a giant Mary Sue, which I hate that term, but that's exactly what his little bard guy is, and yeah, that's really it.
Second book is literally 1,000 pages of nothing happening. He starts the book still in the university. He ends the book still in the university. In between, he goes off on pointless side quests and he has a bunch of sex in between. He's no closer to figuring out who killed his family. He's no closer to fulfilling any of those epic adventures that he promises at the beginning of the previous book, 1,600 pages earlier. Literally nothing happens, but because the prose is kind of, the prose is purple, and I don't have anything against purple prose as long as there's a point to it. It's not just, for masturbatory purposes, which it is for Rothfuss. I mean, his characters say nothing, but they say nothing in a way that seems clever and wise. So people are like, "Oh, he's his dialogue. It's so awesome. He's saying so many deep things. Like he's not saying anything. He's just talking in circles, but he's using big words, and it sounds good."
Right. Well, and that's why
guys,
there will never be a third book because he has nothing to say, right? Like, what's the point of it all? Nihilism for nihilism's sake, or just cool stuff for cool stuff's sake gets boring after a while, and there's nowhere to go. He wrote himself into a corner in the first book, and there's just nothing there. And you're absolutely right, he says nothing, Fister, you're gonna say something?
yeah, it's funny that you guys that were having this conversation with Josh after our conversations with von Hofmeister. And I want to bring in something that he wrote earlier this week. The title of the article, it's on um, his Euro Siberia Substack, but it says "White Identity in America." And these couple last paragraphs, I want to read these real fast if I can. Identity
I,
here
I got
acts as a
Sorry,
what?
man. I got about 5 minutes before I got a jet.
Perfect. All right, I will shorten my point. Identity here acts as a compass, never a cage. It points to something essential, never reductive. Within its frame, new expressions rise art, ritual, story, space. At the very end, he says, identity is grounded in respect, carried with humility, lit by ancestral fire, serves not as a threat, but as a promise to remain, to remember, and reimagine. And he makes a very key split between supremacy, which is trash, and harmony. And I think maybe what you're trying to do here, what you might be looking to do here, Josh, is explore all those things and see what that is. And we're going to have to reimagine what an American Tolkien or what an American story might look like. And if I may be so bold, when I was getting ready for this podcast, I was looking through your Substack a bit. Adrift might be your seed crystal. That image you painted, man, a man and a woman on the prairie who don't know how badly they're going to need each other.
Yeah, I
I
like that.
mean,
I like that a lot too.
hey, paint that out 3,000 years and tell me what America looks like at that point.
Right.
I I appreciate it, man. That one.
But yeah, it's cool, man. So, but these are the kinds of things I think we need to think. So I know we're short on time, so I'll simply leave it at that.
So yeah, I'll end it. I'll end it with a challenge, right? And this is a conversation we're gonna keep on having on and on and
Yeah,
on,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
For
yeah.
writers, whether you're writing fantasy, science fiction, literary stuff, right? We need to identify who we are as a people now, right? We
Yes.
need to and
Yeah.
I'm talking to Americans, right? This is to
Yep.
Americans, not to
Yep.
Europeans, right?
If you're living on North America, this is for
Europeans
you.
know who they are. Okay, Europeans know who they
Yeah.
are. Us, we have a problem. We have a problem. That's what's going on right now. We don't
Yeah.
know who we are. Okay,
Yeah.
and as a writer, when you're putting, you need to say something about us, right? About Americans, right? It doesn't have to be cowboys or or bankers in New York or whatever, right? But right, you have to channel the truth of the land that you write in the same way Tolkien did, right? Tolkien could have not written Lord of the Rings set in the Wild West, right? Because no matter what he would have written about, it would have still been about England because he was English and he channeled the English spirit into his work, right? The hobbits do not live in the United States, okay? They never have and they never will, all right? They belong to the British land, to the English soil, right? Um,
Mhm.
we need to identify our hobbits, okay? We need to identify what makes us us, right? And you can throw in all the fantastic elements, dragons and wendigos or all kinds of cool, whatever, right? But there's a story there in fantasy that belongs to America, and we need to write it, okay? We cannot look back across the ocean all the time and take their motifs, right? Because their motifs are not our motifs, right? And in science fiction they're a lot better because you got cyberpunk and stuff, and cyberpunk is very American in a way. But for fantasy, if fantasy is going to have is if it's going to have merit, right? If it's not going to be forever Patrick Rothfuss nonsense, right? We need to find the American fantasy, right? We need to find what the spiritual you know Tolkien-esque ethos of, you know, the frontier or the South or even New England and that kind of stuff. And we need to identify and we need to write about that. I mean, yes, Lovecraft did a good job of it, in this crazy like nihilistic way. And Robert Howard also did very well with Conan, right? But even both of them took a lot of elements from Europe, right? We need to dig in the soil of America and write the fantasy for America for the 21st century. All right, that's my challenge to everybody. Okay, let's get that shit done. Okay. All right, Josh, thank you very much, man. Okay, I'm gonna let you go. You can log off, and me and Fist are gonna log off too because we're gonna do a quick episode today. Okay, because I got a lot of
Woo.
stuff to do. I got my dog at the vet again, and she's got a hookworm supposedly, and she got herself an IV. Um, all right, man. Good night, Josh. Thanks for coming on. And everybody, go ahead and subscribe to Josh's Substack. And for all you listeners, please like, share, and send us some money, man. We got to meet up in Charleston and have a live meeting eventually. So we need that. We need that bank. We need that bag. Okay. Uh, should I do a GoFundMe for you, Fisto?
Why for me?
I
Because of
don't
the
know.
eventual legal fees?
Probably right. We
Bring it
need.
on.
I
Bring
need
it
four hundred
on.
thousand dollars too, man. Okay, so
Well, there,
okay,
there's one way to get that, but I don't think you're gonna like it.
yeah,
gotta pay off that house somehow.
I gotta pay
Yeah,
off the
man.
house, right? Okay, man. Good night, guys, and good night, fans. I will see you next week. Next week we have another author coming on. We have Autumn Christian. She's a actually fantastic science fiction and literary writer. She writes on Substack under Teach Robots to Love, but she's more of a Twitter X person. She's amazing. Her book Girl Like Bomb is really great. Very spicy, right? Very exciting stuff. And all right, guys, I love you all, and good night.